The functions of antecedent stimuli have been difficult for most of you, and really for most students that I've worked with over the years. We're talking about two types of antecedent functional stimuli: motivating operations and discriminative stimuli. Let's use a silly little example to demonstrate where the differences between SDs and MOs really are. Let's assume you've gone to a conference of some sort, and in the evening, about 7 o'clock, you get invited to a hospitality suite. It's been a long day, so you go there to a social gathering. In the back of this hospitality suite, there's a big table that's got large numbers of, to you, delicious appetizers. And over that table is a sign that says free appetizers. Let's first assume that you have not eaten all day. Would there be a motivating operation in place if you had not eaten? Yes, there probably would be. You would have been deprived of food, thus that would have established food as a more valuable reinforcer. The sign, free appetizers, would function as a discriminative stimulus. In the past, it's been correlated with the availability of reinforcers, in this case appetizers, so now its function would be to occasion behaviors that have resulted in access to appetizers. What might those behaviors be? It might be walking back to the table and just picking them up, or it might be asking someone to bring you some appetizers. But whatever behaviors have in the past accessed appetizers would be occasioned by this sign, free appetizers, if it in fact is a discriminative stimulus. So we have a situation of food deprivation making appetizers more reinforcing, and now you are even more likely to go back there and get food. Your behaviors will be increased. You have an establishing operation for appetizers and an evocative effect on behavior. Note that the sign doesn't have any effect on the value of appetizers. It only is correlated with their availability. And also note that the motivating operation has nothing to do with the availability of food. What if there were no appetizers? Motivating operation would still be present. You'd be deprived of food, and behaviors that in the past had gotten you food would still be more likely. So now let's assume that you went to a huge dinner just before the gathering and completely got stuffed. You ate even some of these delicious appetizers. Now what might the MO be? Well, in this case it'd be satiation, and there would be an abative effect on behavior. So it would reduce the value of food as a reinforcer. It would abate or decrease behaviors that in the past had accessed food. The free appetizer sign still is a discriminative stimulus. It still indicates that reinforcers are available because of past correlation with the presence of reinforcers. However, the value of these appetizers is now probably pretty near zero, and you're going back to get them or asking for them is going to be probably also at near zero. So this motivating operation abolished food as a reinforcer and reduced the frequency of behaviors that may have accessed food. Let's just talk about what kinds of motivating operations probably have the most clinical relevance. Certainly an unconditioned motivating operation involving stimuli that, like food, are going to have a role in the clinical world if you're using food as reinforcers, for example, or if kids are earning tokens which they exchange for food. Then satiation and deprivation are going to be for unconditioned motivating operations that affect behavior. Conditioned motivating operations. Well, there is a conditioned motivating operation that's basically an analog to the idea of satiation and deprivation. For example, social attention. It's not one of the three named types of conditioned motivating operations, but it is very common. So for misbehaviors that are maintained by social attention, they're going to be affected by changes in the free availability of attention or the deprivation of attention, just like the example in your homework. And I think we talked about some of those in the introductory lecture, and your book certainly does. CMO reflexive, CMOR. Those are very clinically relevant because behavior that's maintained by escape, misbehavior maintained by escape, is very common if you work with almost any kind of kid in classrooms or other kinds of agencies. These establish themselves as aversive and establish their removal as reinforcing. This is very common, so a very, very difficult task that a kid really can't do might, after a few minutes, become aversive, and the child might be more likely to misbehave in order to escape from it or to ask for a break or whatever it may be. And then finally, the CMOTs, again from your homework and other examples in the articles, very commonly manipulated in teaching language, where they create these situations where some stimulus is now reinforcing, like the missing headphones, or you want to play a game and the game's not visible. A kid wants to go outside and his coat is not visible. So now the coat's reinforcing, the game's reinforcing, the headphone reinforcing. And these things are purposely manipulated very frequently by staff in order to change behavior, or either to decrease it or, in the latter example, to increase it. Now let's take a look at some things that I think can be confusing. We're just going to go through the effect of abolishing and establishing operations on positive, negative reinforcers and positive punishers, because there are some seemingly opposite effects. So if there isn't any kind of abolishing operation that relates to a positive reinforcer, it's going to reduce the reinforcing quality. That's the value altering effect. It could reduce the reinforcing value of social attention, food, excess desirable activities, or even for automatically reinforcing sensations, automatic reinforcement, if you go back and look at that chapter on reinforcement. Any behavior that's been reinforced by these stimuli that are now less valuable will decrease, have an abative effect. So, satiation or some analog acts as an abolishing operation. Example, classroom disruption is maintained through contingent teacher attention. Now that was on a test, I think. It was also on homework. If you can satiate attention, it will reduce the value of attention and decrease misbehavior that's been maintained. Abolishes attention as a reinforcer. It abates behaviors that have been reinforced. That's reasonably straightforward. Now let's talk about abolishing operations and negative reinforcement. What are we abolishing? We're going to abolish the aversiveness, really, of something. So an abolishing operation would reduce the aversiveness of some aversive stimulus from which people have escaped or which people have avoided. So it'll make it less aversive, and its effect would be to abate or decrease behaviors that have escaped or avoided that aversive stimulus. So it's not as bad anymore. So if you think about it, if you want to think about it just in colloquial terms, there's no need to escape or avoid. So escape or avoidance behaviors are reduced. Here's an example. Kid throws tantrums often during his math worksheet because math is very, very difficult. Works on it in a few minutes. That math worksheet becomes a CMOR, becomes aversive, and it evokes behaviors that escape from the worksheet. In this case, a tantrum. So if you make math worksheets easier, you may abolish their aversiveness, and you may then decrease future tantrums because there's nothing aversive to escape from. So an aversive stimulus can be a negative reinforcer when it's present before a behavior. It's a negative reinforcer for any behavior that avoids it or escapes it. Now let's talk about abolishing operations and positive punishers. Positive punisher and a negative reinforcer are the same stimulus, essentially. One's antecedent to behavior, one is consequent or contingent on behavior. So let's make bad things less bad, and of course that would increase behavior. So let's talk about this. Positive punisher. If you make something less bad, that's the value altering. It abolishes the badness, if you want to think about it. But then it would increase previously punished behaviors. That's the behavior altering effect. It's evocative. This is where it gets confusing. If you make something less bad, it's not as punishing. You might be more likely to behave in certain ways. Now, some stimuli are so aversive that punishment might already be at zero and near zero levels. Are these likely to increase? Well, if there's some kind of SD that indicates that punishment is no longer available, yes. Otherwise, it may have little effect. But nonetheless, we're talking about what effect it would have on contingent punisher. It will make it less punishing, and it could increase behavior, an evocative effect. So an aversive stimulus can be a positive punisher when it's contingent on behavior. An aversive stimulus is a negative reinforcer when it's antecedent to a behavior. So take a look at this and think about it, because this can be confusing. You're abolishing something, but it's an evocative effect. Now let's just review the effect of establishing operations on these same kinds of stimuli. So, first, establishing operations on positive reinforcers. This is easy to understand. It makes them more reinforcing. That's a value-altering effect. Its behavior-altering effect is to increase future behaviors because behaviors on which reinforcers are contingent receive more reinforcement each time. So that's the value-altering effect and the evocative effect. Remember, deprivation acts as an establishing operation. You deprive someone of food, food is more reinforcing. Deprive someone of social attention is more reinforcing. And again, the example would still be classroom disruption maintained through contingent teacher attention. If you make attention more valuable because you have deprived the person of attention, then it's going to be more reinforcing to misbehavior, and misbehavior will increase. Now let's talk about establishing operation for aversive stimuli. The first kind of aversive stimuli will be a negative reinforcers. So aversive stimulus that happens before behavior, for example. In this case, it makes it more aversive. That's the value altering effect. If it's a CMOR, then it's more aversive. And it would increase the frequency of escape or avoidance behavior. So its behavior altering effect is that it evokes. So it increases aversiveness of an antecedent stimulus, makes it more likely that someone wants to escape or avoid it because it's more aversive. Same example, worksheet as a CMOR, worksheets an aversive stimulus, make it more difficult. You might see more frequent tantrums during math worksheet to escape from working. So an aversive stimulus is a negative reinforcer when it's present before a behavior for any behavior that avoids it or escapes from it. And finally, we're going to talk about an establishing operation for a positive punisher. Same kind of aversive stimulus, just now it's contingent on behavior. Make bad things worse and even further decrease future behavior. So, positive punisher is made more punishing, it's value altering, then it's going to further decrease previously contingently punished behaviors. And again, some stimuli are so aversive that punishment may already be at 0 or near 0 level, and any behavior change is not going to be possible. This can be confusing because an establishing operation for a contingent aversive abates behavior, but an establishing operation for a positive reinforcer evokes behavior. So the abating and evoking are not always associated with either establishing or abolishing. It depends on what's being established or abolished. You establish contingent aversive, you abate behavior. You establish contingent positive, you evoke behavior. And again, an aversive stimulus can be a positive punisher when it's contingent on behavior, a negative reinforcer when it's antecedent to behavior. Hope this has made some of these clear. But nonetheless, you just need to really think about these and consider them because it is an important aspect and an important principle in applied behavior analysis. I will be providing you an intro video for the Module 8 here shortly.